Have you or your children ever struggled to trust God with your feelings? That's the topic that we're going to address today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager, and today I have a remarkable author as my guest. Her name is Abigail Gehring Lawrence, and she's an editor, author, and mother to a 14-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a daughter in heaven. In 2022, her full-term baby girl was stillborn, an experience that left her grappling with what it means to trust God. And her new children's book is called God's Very Good Plan, a Christmas story about trusting God, which she authored with her son, William. Welcome, Abigail. I am so honored to have you and your very important message on Flourish-Meant today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Abigail, I would like to dive into some ways that we can reach our kids and help them navigate and cope with emotions using stories. How is that a good vehicle for helping parent your kids through difficult times?
Stories are so powerful. For one thing, they're fun and they're imaginative. And so that automatically connects children. And I think in my book, the main characters are animals. I know my 2-year-old daughter loves animals. She'd rather look at animals than people. So I think that adds a fun, imaginative element to it. And I think it takes some of the heaviness out of it while still communicating the message. But, we see throughout the Bible how stories are used to bring important truths. Jesus used parables so frequently. He was a master storyteller. I think that the way that we're created is to connect with story.
Sometimes when it's hard for us to connect with our own feelings, adults or kids, we can do so through the context of a story. And that's where kind of God meets us in the living word and through people that are storytellers like you. Can you talk about how this process was with your son becoming a storyteller as well? How did it work with you, working with him to craft this story?
Well, I think it helps that he's still a kid. And so he has a very active imagination and doesn't have some of the inhibitions that adults might have. This is our second book working together closely, and we sort of brainstorm together. So we didn't sit down with like, okay, here are the hard truths that we want to communicate. It was more like, what would make a good story? And then it sort of evolved naturally because of our experiences. He was like, something like, well, what about when I broke my wrist? And like, that was a hard thing. And he has a natural sense of like a story needs to have an arc, like something, there's got to be a challenge, something difficult has to happen, and then there has to be a resolution. So we kind of brainstormed general ideas together. And then I kind of, wrote out more of the manuscript and shared that with him. He gives his feedback. And then, of course, the illustrations are always fun. I don't do the art myself, but giving guidance to the illustrator and then seeing the sketches and reviewing them together, seeing it come to life with the color. It's a really fun process and a real joy to be able to include him in that.
It's such a wonderful thing that you're able to bond with your son through this process of writing a story. And I think it's a gift to parents and children as well, that they may not realize how powerful it is in the context of bonding with your child over a story. There is a lot of research that shows that children and parents experience tremendous bonding when they have reading time. And particularly the content of this story of how to trust God with your feelings can open up discussions that are very important, that begin early, that can continue through the childhood of that child of yours and into possibly even teenage years when it's really difficult to reconnect if you haven't connected before. Not impossible, but more difficult. So can you talk about how this is a great way of beginning this journey of staying open, like creating places where kids can talk about their feelings with their parents?
Well, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, when I was in the hospital in labor with Hazel and knowing that she had passed away. And there's this stretch of time after I learned she had died, and between when I gave birth to her. And I was in labor during that time, but it also was time to start to process and to think. And I remember one of the very first questions I had was, how am I going to tell my kids? And how is this going to impact them? That was just so hard to think about. Here they were, so excited about bringing home a baby sister. They were going to meet her the next day. My son was so excited to be a big brother. And one of the questions within that was like, is this going to impact their relationship with God? So I say that because I think that stories can provide context for parents to have really difficult conversations with their kids. And there were a couple of other children's books that other people gifted us around grief, and they were very helpful, I think, when we don't always have the words. So having a book that you can sit down with your child, have them in your lap, connect with them physically, move away the distractions, look at a book together and read it. And then from there, you can ask, how does this story make you feel? Did anything come up for you as we were reading this? Do you have any questions? Or a lot of times the conversation will just come up organically. Your child will say something and it'll springboard you into a whole discussion. And again, this particular book, God's Very Good Plan, isn't necessarily just about grief. It can be any kind of challenge or disappointment. And it can be a book that just helps breed resilience in your children, that when hard things happen, we can keep going and keep trusting God and move on with our lives. And we never know what good thing may come out of it in the long run.
Thank you for sharing that deep, heartfelt perspective, Abigail. I know there are parents that struggle in their own hurt and perhaps from their own hurt, not knowing how to deal with and cope with and navigate their own emotions, much less responding to their kids' emotions in a particular season. And yet, if you have that context of a story, if you have that, you can work with your kids through the story when you don't have your own words to provide to that situation. So story can be a tremendous gift. And I appreciate you providing the story. I also want to talk about looking at God as empathetic in our suffering. It makes me think of, when you're not able to feel, when you're not able to experience God, it makes me think of Jesus on the cross, having experienced that, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because he was not able to feel that in the midst of feeling all the sin of all the world that had ever been or ever would be, and all of the physical suffering that he was just feeling, that acute pain physically, emotionally, spiritually. So he knows what it's like for us to feel that when we're there. Knowing that God empathizes means a lot. Can you talk about that?
It does mean a lot. I was also thinking about in the Gospels, we read about when Lazarus died and Jesus came to see Mary and Martha. And Jesus is God in that story, and he knows that he's going to bring Lazarus back from the dead. But he feels the grief of Lazarus's sisters so deeply that he weeps with them, even knowing that it's going to turn out in this beautiful display of his glory. I just think that speaks so much to his character, that although he is God, he is also human and can identify with our emotions and does identify with our emotions, and cares about our feelings, whether they're big, deep grief or some little frustration in the middle of the day. It's not insignificant to Jesus, to God. And I think that's really important to remember. There can be shame that goes along with grief that doesn't go away quickly, with any experience of disappointment. I think, at least in some Christian culture, there can be an expectation that you're going to put a smile on your face and put your makeup on and, get back to it. And that's not always realistic. That's not always healthy. And I don't think that that's always God's way. There's a reason there's a whole book of the Bible that's Lamentations. Suffering is real. The Bible is clear that Christians will encounter it. We will encounter hardship in this world. And I don't think we're meant to just gloss over it and put a happy face on. I think we're meant to feel it. And again, bring those feelings to God. It can be a problem if we're just sitting in our feelings and there's no place for them to go. But thankfully, we do have the most empathetic Savior to share with us in our suffering.
Even if no one else understands, the Lord invites us to come process those feelings in prayer, even while they stay messy, even while they stay tangled, even while they're not worked out yet. He can be with us in the midst of our deep, deep suffering. So I appreciate you sharing this important message. Are there any other really important last-minute things that you want to speak to the audience about trusting God with our feelings?
I guess I would just reiterate that the experience of loss, grief, suffering is different for each person. So although I think it's a universal thing that we can bring our feelings to God, those feelings might look different for each person. And we don't need to add the additional burden of shame or a specific timeline for getting through them or a specific script of this is what this should look like. I think it is helpful, vital even, to have a community of believers around you who can speak into your life and say, hey, actually, I don't think this is healthy. Maybe you need some additional help, or maybe, I know you, I know who you were before this experience. Something is off now. I don't know. Just like, I think that there's a place for speaking into that, but at the same time, it is different for everyone. So the purpose of this book is not so much to say, this is what it should look like when you encounter hardship and it all works out in the end, but rather to say, life is messy. Things happen, hardship will come, but we can trust God's character. We can trust that He is good, that He has a plan, and that He wants to hear us say how we're feeling and to be with us in those feelings.
Such a wonderful parenting context for helping your kids understand their feelings are valid. It's what we do with our feelings that's important, and how we cope with them, and what we do when we act on our feelings that we need to pay attention to. But God is understanding that we have all of these feelings. It's not shameful to have a negative feeling. It's not wrong to feel a certain way. I think parents can get that confused in the way they talk to their kids, and then kids can begin to stuff and stifle and deny their own feelings. So this is a really healthy book to work through with your kids on how to trust God with your feelings, whether they're messy or not, and kind of distinguish how you feel from how you behave out of those feelings. So that's super, super important for parents. So Abigail, how can people follow you and get their own copy of God's Very Good Plan?
Thank you. Yes, you can find me on Facebook, Abigail Gehring, and the book is available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, and you can ask at your independent bookstore. If they don't have it in stock already, they should be able to easily order it, and it is also available through Scholastic.
I hope that all of you listening were inspired to get a copy for those you love or for your families of God's Very Good Plan, so that you can help your kids trust God with their feelings. And of course, I also hope that you will come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.